The snow fell gently on Christmas Eve, 1929, in Wilson, North Carolina. Families gathered around warm fires, children dreamed of presents under decorated trees, and the smell of holiday cooking filled homes across the small tobacco town. But in one house on Nash Street, something unspeakable was about to shatter the peace of that holy night. What happened there would become one of North Carolina's most haunting unsolved mysteries, a case that has confounded investigators for nearly a century and left a permanent scar on a community that has never forgotten. This is the story of the Christmas Eve Massacre. To understand this tragedy, we need to understand Wilson, North Carolina in 1929. This was a town built on tobacco, a place where fortunes were made in the golden leaf that grew in the rich Carolina soil. Wilson sat at the heart of the brightest tobacco belt in the world, and by the late 1920s, it had become one of the most prosperous small cities in the South. The streets were lined with elegant Victorian homes, their wraparound porches speaking to an era of Southern gentility. Downtown, the Wilson Times building stood as a monument to progress, while the tobacco warehouses hummed with activity during auction season. This was a place where everyone knew everyone, where family names mattered, and where reputation was everything. Into this world, the Lawson family seemed to fit perfectly. Charles Davis Lawson, known to everyone as Charlie, was a respected tobacco farmer. At 43 years old, he had built a solid life for himself and his family. He wasn't wealthy by the standards of Wilson's tobacco elite, but he was doing well enough to provide for his wife and their 8 children. Fanny Lawson, Charlie's wife, was 37 years old that Christmas. Those who knew her described her as a devoted mother, a woman who held her large family together with love and discipline. She was known for her cooking, her kindness to neighbors, and her tireless work managing a household that included 6 children still living at home. The Lawson children were the heart of the family. Marie, the oldest daughter still at home, was 17 and blossoming into a beautiful young woman. Arthur, 16, was his father's right hand on the farm, strong and reliable. Carrie, 12, was known for her bright smile and helpful nature. Mabel, at 7, was the family's little sweetheart. James, 4, and Raymond, 2, were the babies, still young enough to believe in the magic of Christmas with pure, uncomplicated joy. There were 2 other children in the family's story. The oldest son, Arthur, had already left home and started his own life. And then there was 4-month-old Mary Lou, a baby who would become central to one of the most disturbing theories about what happened at Christmas Eve. In the weeks leading up to Christmas 1929, Charlie Lawson seemed to be in unusually good spirits. The tobacco crop had done well that year, and he had money in his pocket. He did something he'd never done before. He took his entire family into town and bought them all new clothes and had a family portrait taken. This was remarkable for several reasons. First, professional photography was still something of a luxury, especially for farming families. Second, it was odd to get such formal attire right before Christmas when the clothes would surely get dirty during the holiday festivities. And third, there was something in Charlie's demeanor that several people later remembered as strange, almost as if he were preparing for something. The photograph that was taken that day would become one of the most haunting images in true crime history. In it, the family stands together, dressed in their finest. Charlie stands stern and unsmiling, while Fanny holds baby Mary Lou. The children are arranged around them, some smiling slightly, others looking serious for the camera. They had no way of knowing that this image would be the last portrait of them together, that it would be reproduced in newspapers across the country, that people would study their faces for decades trying to understand what was about to happen. Christmas morning dawned cold and clear in Wilson. Across town, families were waking up to open presents and begin their holiday celebrations. At the Lawson farm, the day began like any other, with morning chores and breakfast preparations. But Charlie Lawson was not himself that morning. Those who saw him later would say there was something different in his eyes, something distant and determined. After breakfast, he told his oldest sons that he was going hunting. He took his shotgun and walked toward the tobacco barn, a structure that sat some distance from the main house. What happened next would shock a nation still reeling from the stock market crash just 2 months earlier, would make headlines from North Carolina to California, and would leave investigators with more questions than answers. Inside the house, Fanny Lawson was busy with the Christmas preparations. Her daughters Marie and Carrie were helping her, while the younger children played nearby. Baby Mary Lou was likely sleeping or being tended to by one of the older girls. They had no reason to be afraid, no reason to think that this Christmas would be anything but joyful. Charlie returned to the house. He was carrying his shotgun. And then, methodically, deliberately, he began to kill his family. The first to die was Fanny. Charlie shot his wife of 18 years as she stood in the house. Before the other family members could fully comprehend what was happening, he turned the gun on Marie, 17 years old, with her whole life ahead of her. Then Carrie, only 12. The shots rang out in rapid succession, the sound of gunfire replacing what should have been Christmas carols and children's laughter. The younger children, Mabel, James, and Raymond, were killed next. 7, 4, and 2 years old. Babies, really. Children who probably didn't understand what was happening, who might have reached for their father thinking he would protect them. In the chaos and horror, Arthur, the 16-year-old son, tried to run. He made it outside the house, perhaps thinking he could escape, perhaps trying to get help. But his father pursued him. Charlie caught up with his son between the house and the barn and shot him down. The boy who had worked alongside his father in the tobacco fields, who had trusted him completely, died in the dirt of the family farm. But Charlie wasn't done. He had one more victim in mind. He went to where baby Mary Lou was and killed the 4-month-old infant. The youngest and most innocent victim of all. 7 members of his family. His wife. 5 of his children. His infant daughter. All dead by his own hand. And then Charlie Lawson did something that makes this case even more disturbing, even more inexplicable. He carefully arranged the bodies of his victims. He moved them to the tobacco barn, laying them out with their arms crossed over their chests. He placed stones under their heads, like pillows. Some reports say he covered their faces with cloth. It was almost ritualistic, a grotesque parody of laying out the dead for burial. After arranging the bodies with this terrible care, Charlie walked into the woods near his property. He found a spot by a large rock, near a stream. He sat down, placed his shotgun against his head, and pulled the trigger. It was Charlie's oldest son, also named Arthur but living away from the family farm, who discovered the massacre. When the family didn't arrive for Christmas dinner at a relative's house and didn't respond to messages, Arthur became worried. He drove out to the farm with other family members. What they found was beyond comprehension. The crime scene was described by investigators as one of the most horrific they had ever encountered. Blood was everywhere. The bodies in the barn had been carefully arranged, but the violence that had created those corpses was evident in every detail. News of the massacre spread through Wilson like wildfire. By evening, crowds had gathered near the farm, held back by local police who were overwhelmed by the scene. Some came out of morbid curiosity, others because they knew the family and couldn't believe what they were hearing. The small police force in Wilson had never dealt with anything remotely like this. The Wilson Times ran a special edition. Headlines screamed the news across their front page. Within hours, the story had been picked up by wire services and was being reported in newspapers across the country. The Christmas Eve massacre, as it quickly became known, captured the nation's attention in a way few crimes had before. The photographs from that day are difficult to look at even now. Images of the tobacco barn where the bodies were found, the crowd of onlookers, the grim-faced investigators. And that family portrait, taken just days before, was reproduced in newspaper after newspaper, a before and after that seemed almost impossible to comprehend. A coroner's inquest was held quickly. The verdict was straightforward in its facts if not its explanation. Charlie Lawson had murdered his wife and 6 of his children before taking his own life. But the question that dominated every conversation, every newspaper article, every whispered discussion in Wilson streets was simply, why? In the 95 years since the Christmas Eve massacre, numerous theories have been proposed to explain Charlie Lawson's actions. Some are supported by evidence, others by rumor and speculation. None of them fully satisfy, because how can any explanation truly account for a father murdering his entire family on Christmas Day? The most commonly cited theory involves a head injury. In the months before the massacre, Charlie had been cutting wood when he was struck in the head by a falling log. Some witnesses reported that he seemed different after this injury, more irritable, more prone to headaches, sometimes seeming confused or distant. Could this head trauma have caused a brain injury that led to psychosis? It's possible. Traumatic brain injuries can cause personality changes, mood disorders, even violent behavior. But most people who suffer head injuries don't become family annihilators. There had to be more to the story. The second theory is far more disturbing and has been whispered about in Wilson for decades, though rarely stated directly in print. This theory suggests that Charlie had been sexually abusing his daughter Marie, and that she had become pregnant by him. Baby Mary Lou, according to this theory, was not Fanny's child at all but Marie's, the product of incest and abuse. If this theory is true, and there is circumstantial evidence to support it though nothing conclusive, it would provide a motive for the massacre. Perhaps Marie had threatened to reveal the abuse. Perhaps Fanny had discovered the truth. Perhaps Charlie, seeing his reputation and life about to be destroyed, chose to kill everyone rather than face the consequences of his actions. This theory would also explain why Charlie bought the new clothes and arranged for the family photograph. He was, in effect, preparing them for burial. It would explain the ritualistic arrangement of the bodies, an attempt at some kind of atonement or final gesture of care. And it would explain why he killed baby Mary Lou, the evidence of his crime. But again, this is speculation. In 1929, there was no DNA testing, and the investigation did not pursue this angle aggressively if at all. The social taboos around discussing such matters were strong, and the community may have preferred a simpler explanation, even if it satisfied no one. A third theory suggests financial problems. The stock market had crashed in October 1929, and the Great Depression was beginning to grip the nation. Perhaps Charlie was facing financial ruin and couldn't bear the thought of his family suffering poverty. But this theory has significant problems. By all accounts, the tobacco crop had done well. Charlie had enough money to buy his family new clothes and pay for professional photographs. There's no evidence of significant debt or impending financial collapse. Some have suggested religious mania, pointing to Charlie's reported attendance at church and suggesting he might have developed some kind of delusional religious belief. But there's little evidence for this. Charlie was not known to be particularly religious, and there were no reports of erratic religious behavior or statements in the time leading up to the murders. Mental illness is often cited, and it's certainly possible that Charlie was suffering from depression, psychosis, or some other psychiatric condition. But mental illness alone rarely leads to family annihilation. Most people with mental illness are not violent, and those who are violent rarely turn on their entire family with such methodical brutality. The most likely explanation, if we can call anything about this case likely, is probably a combination of factors. Perhaps the head injury created a physiological basis for violence or impaired judgment. Perhaps there was abuse and a desperate attempt to prevent its revelation. Perhaps there were stresses and pressures we don't know about. Perhaps there was mental illness that had gone unrecognized and untreated. Or perhaps, and this is the most unsettling possibility, there was no explanation that would satisfy us. Perhaps Charlie Lawson simply made a choice, a monstrous and incomprehensible choice, to destroy his family and himself. The Lawson family tragedy didn't end with the burials. The impact on Wilson, North Carolina, and on the surviving family members, rippled outward for decades. The funerals were massive affairs. Thousands of people attended, some from genuine grief, others from morbid curiosity. The victims were buried together in a cemetery in Wilson County. Charlie Lawson was buried separately, in an unmarked grave some distance away. Even in death, he was separated from the family he had destroyed. The oldest son Arthur, who had been spared only because he was living away from home, was left to carry an unbearable burden. He had lost his mother, his siblings, his father, and his innocent view of the world all in one terrible day. Reports from later in his life suggest he struggled with what had happened, as anyone would. How do you move forward after something like this? How do you ever feel safe or trust anyone again? The Lawson farm became a macabre tourist attraction. People came from miles around to see the site of the massacre. They walked through the property, took photographs, and collected souvenirs. The exploitation of tragedy for entertainment is nothing new, but the speed and scale with which it happened in the Lawson case was remarkable even for 1929. The buildings where the murders occurred were eventually torn down, but the site continued to draw visitors for years. In the decades since, it has become something of a dark landmark in North Carolina history, a place that ghost hunters and true crime enthusiasts still seek out. The case has been the subject of numerous books, articles, documentaries, and even a country song. Each retelling adds new theories or perspectives, but the core mystery remains. The Lawson murders have become part of North Carolina folklore, a cautionary tale, a ghost story, and an unsolved puzzle all at once. In Wilson itself, the massacre left a permanent mark. For years, people in the town remembered where they were when they heard the news. Families who had known the Lawsons carried the weight of the tragedy with them. The community had to grapple with the fact that such horror could happen in their midst, in what seemed like an ordinary family. In recent decades, renewed interest in the case has led to fresh investigations and new theories. True crime enthusiasts, historians, and even psychologists have examined the evidence, looking for answers that satisfied no one in 1929. Some modern researchers have focused on the head injury theory, consulting with neurosurgeons and neuropsychologists about what effects the reported blow to Charlie's head might have had. The consensus seems to be that while such an injury could potentially cause personality changes and violent behavior, it would be unusual for it to result in the kind of methodical, planned violence that characterized the Lawson murders. Others have pursued the incest theory more directly. They've examined birth records, interviewed descendants of people who knew the family, and analyzed the timeline of Marie's and Mary Lou's births. While some believe the evidence supports this theory, there's nothing conclusive. Without DNA evidence, which doesn't exist for this case, it remains speculation, though speculation with some circumstantial support. There have been attempts to psychologically profile Charlie Lawson using modern criminal psychology techniques. These profiles suggest a man who may have been narcissistic, controlling, and unable to cope with the thought of public shame or loss of status. The family photograph takes on new significance in this analysis, seen as an attempt to create a final, idealized image of the family before destroying it. Some researchers have tried to find out if there were any warning signs that were missed or ignored. Were there instances of domestic violence that went unreported? Had Charlie shown signs of mental instability that people dismissed as stress or personality quirks? The historical record is incomplete, and memories from that era are long gone, making it difficult to reconstruct the full picture of what life was like in the Lawson household before the massacre. Local historians have worked to preserve what records do exist. Newspaper accounts, court documents, photographs, and oral histories have been collected and archived. The famous family photograph has been preserved and is now part of the historical record, a haunting reminder of lives cut short. Behind the theories and the investigations, behind the dark tourism and the true crime fascination, there are real human lives that were lost. It's easy, almost a century later, to focus on the mystery and forget the tragedy. Fanny Lawson was a real woman who woke up on Christmas morning expecting to celebrate with her family. She likely spent hours preparing food, thinking about her children's happiness, looking forward to the joy of the day. She died violently, killed by the man she had trusted, married, and built a life with. Marie was 17, on the cusp of adulthood. Whatever happened in her short life, whatever pain or fear she might have experienced, she was still a teenager with hopes and dreams. She should have had decades ahead of her. Carrie, Mabel, James, and Raymond were children. The oldest was 12, the youngest only 2. They died before they could really live, before they could discover who they might become. And baby Mary Lou, only 4 months old. Whatever the circumstances of her birth, she was an innocent infant who deserved to be loved and protected. Even Arthur, the 16-year-old who tried to run, deserves to be remembered not just as a victim in a crime statistic but as a young man who was betrayed in the most fundamental way by his own father. The surviving Arthur, the oldest son, lived the rest of his life carrying the weight of what happened. Every Christmas must have been a reminder. Every family gathering must have felt incomplete. He lost not just his family but his sense of safety and trust in the world. You might be asking yourself, how can this case be considered unsolved when we know who did it? Charlie Lawson killed his family and then himself. The physical facts are clear. But in every meaningful sense, the case remains unsolved because we don't know why. And that why matters. It matters to the community that had to grapple with this tragedy. It matters to the descendants of the surviving family members. It matters to psychologists trying to understand family annihilators. And it matters to all of us trying to make sense of human behavior at its most incomprehensible. The frustrating reality is that we may never know the full truth. The people who could have provided answers are all dead. Charlie Lawson left no note, no explanation, no final words that would help us understand his actions. If there were warning signs, if there were secrets in the family, if there were precipitating events, they died with him and his victims. This is the nature of many historical crimes. The passage of time destroys evidence, memories fade, and context is lost. Modern investigative techniques could potentially shed light on some aspects of the case, but they can't resurrect the dead or reach back through time to observe what really happened in the Lawson household. What we're left with is a terrible crime, a handful of theories, and an enduring mystery. The Christmas Eve massacre remains unsolved not in a technical sense, but in the most important sense, we don't understand it. And perhaps that's the most frightening thing of all. The Lawson family massacre forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature, about family dynamics, about the capacity for violence that can exist even in seemingly ordinary people. It reminds us that we can never truly know what goes on inside someone else's mind, what demons they might be fighting, what secrets they might be keeping. The Lawsons seemed like a normal family. Charlie seemed like a regular farmer. But something, whether it was injury, illness, evil, or a combination of factors we can't begin to untangle, turned him into a murderer. The case also highlights the importance of mental health awareness and intervention. If Charlie was suffering from depression, psychosis, or the effects of a brain injury, there were no resources available to help him in rural North Carolina in 1929. Today, we have better understanding of mental health issues, but we still struggle to identify and treat people who might pose a danger to themselves or others. For those interested in true crime, the Lawson case serves as a reminder that behind every sensational headline, there are real people who suffered and died. It's easy to get caught up in theories and speculation, but we should never forget the human cost of these tragedies. The Christmas Eve massacre also shows us how a single act of violence can echo through generations. The surviving family members, the community of Wilson, and even the state of North Carolina still carry the weight of what happened that day. Trauma doesn't just affect the immediate victims, it ripples outward, affecting everyone it touches. Nearly a century later, people still visit the site of the Lawson farm. They still discuss the case, propose new theories, and search for answers. The family photograph still haunts anyone who sees it. And every Christmas, someone somewhere remembers the family that should have been celebrating but instead died in violence and horror. The Christmas Eve massacre in Wilson, North Carolina remains one of the most disturbing unsolved mysteries in American true crime history. 7 innocent people died, killed by the man who should have protected them. A family that posed together for a photograph, dressed in their finest clothes, was destroyed just days later. We may never know why Charlie Lawson did what he did. We can speculate, theorize, and analyze, but the full truth died with him in the woods near his farm on Christmas Day, 1929. What we're left with are questions that have no satisfying answers, a tragedy that defies comprehension, and a reminder that evil can hide behind the most ordinary faces. If you ever find yourself in Wilson, North Carolina, you might drive past the land where the Lawson farm once stood. The buildings are long gone, but the story remains. And on quiet nights, especially around Christmas, some say you can still feel the weight of what happened there, the sorrow and the horror of that terrible day. The Christmas Eve Massacre. A crime that shocked a nation. A mystery that has never been fully solved. And a reminder that sometimes the most frightening horrors are the ones that happen in our own homes, committed by the people we trust most. Rest in peace, Fanny, Marie, Arthur, Carrie, Mabel, James, Raymond, and Mary Lou Lawson. You deserved so much better than the fate that befell you on Christmas Day, 1929. If you or someone you know is struggling with thoughts of violence or self-harm, please reach out for help. National resources are available 24/7.